Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tristan Casey. I'm a Principal Advisor with Workplace Health and Safety Queensland. I'll be your host today. Thanks so much for your patience. We're just getting our technology sorted over here, but we're all good to go now. So welcome to those of you that are joining us for the first time. This is our second webinar in a series of 5. If you joined us for the first one, the introductory session, I'm sure you walked away with some of that foundational content. And today we're going to build on that because we're focusing now on the transportation industry. We've got some great speakers lined up, a researcher and also someone from industry, to share their insights with you and just take that learning to the next step. So the thing about these webinars, and in fact with culture and climate in general, is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there, a lot of confusion and ambiguity about what those things mean. And this really was hit home for me last week when we attended a symposium down in Melbourne. We had leading academics there telling us that even they haven't completely sorted out those concepts. So it's no wonder that people from industry, you might struggle to understand those things or how to put them into practice. Our real objective with these webinars is to start to build that knowledge and help you do that application. So in terms of the next webinars that are coming up today, obviously we're focusing on transportation, but we've got a couple more coming up over the next few weeks. The next one will be with health and community services, followed by construction. And the final one will be a wrap-up session where we bring that all together and start to look towards more practical application and how do we actually start to measure and improve our safety culture and climate. I just need to mention that the webinar series is brought to you by the Safety Leadership at Work program, or SLAW program, which I'm a part of and helping to further that program's goals. And that's an initiative of the Workplace Health and Safety Queensland Board. So we'll take about an hour today, hopefully a little bit less, so you can get back to your tasks. The recording will be posted on the SLAW website in a few weeks, along with the resources. So just stay tuned for those. So before we get too much further into it, I just thought I'd spend a moment to introduce our speakers and also myself. So our academic expert today is Dr. Sharon Newman. She's an organisational psychologist and she's got over 12 years research experience in transport with a specific focus on that road safety aspect. So Sharon's from Monash Uni, the Accident Research Centre there, and she's been exploring the role of culture and climate from a safety-specific perspective on driver behaviours. So we're looking forward to some of the emerging research that Sharon's going to be sharing with us today. Thanks for coming along. Also joining us is Anastasia Denigan. So she's Head of OHS and Compliance at DGL. She joined DGL in 2012 and has spent over 15 years in different safety-related and compliance-related roles in the transportation industry. So at DGL, Anastasia focuses on that compliance aspect, making sure that they're complying with heavy vehicle legislation, and also that the company maintains its strong safety commitment. So Anastasia is very busy. She represents DGL on a lot of different councils, committees and associations. So 2 very expert speakers, and we hope that they can share their insights a little bit later. So regarding myself, just quickly, I'm an organisational psychologist like Sharon. I guess my interest area is definitely in safety, culture and climate. I've been consulting in that space for a few years now before joining Workplace Health and Safety Queensland. And you'll probably hear a bit more from me if all goes well over the next few webinars. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. Okay, so with all that background out the way, let's jump into the actual topic at hand today. So you should see some pictures pop up there of unfortunate disasters that have occurred. The thing about all these is that they have occurred in Queensland since the start of this year, unfortunately. So it's a real signal to us that we need to do some more work in this area, particularly around safety, culture and climate, that representing perhaps a new avenue to improve safety in the transportation industry. Now, all of these incidents are probably still under investigation, but one of the things we might conclude from them is that there are likely things we could have done differently at maybe a driver level and certainly at an organisational level to avoid some of those incidents. That's what we're going to start unpacking today, is how does culture and climate, what does it look like in the transportation industry, and how can we start to maybe identify those critical factors, those cultural influences that may contribute to some of these incidents. So I'm keen to hear from everyone here before we delve too much into the content. You might see a poll pop up on the right-hand side of your screen there. We'd just be interested to hear your perspective. So of all these different, I guess, at-risk behaviours that might contribute to incidents, which one of these do you think maybe most influenced by workplace culture in the transportation industry? So you can go ahead now and just pick an answer there. As you're doing that, I can tell you a little bit about the context of the choices here. So if you're curious to learn a little bit more after today, I highly recommend looking up a fellow by the name of Jason Edwards. He's out at Queensland University of Technology, and he did a really in-depth study of safety culture in the transportation industry. And he's come up with some great insights, and this is derived from his work there. All right, so we might just collate the data there and have a look at what everyone's said in terms of those behaviours. Shouldn't be too much longer. Okay, great. So we can see all of the above, and that's exactly, I guess, the answer that we were driving towards. It was not so much a trick question, but all those behaviours have cultural underpinnings to them, and Jason's research really identified some of those cultural themes that really predict these at-risk behaviours. Now, I guess it's one thing to sort of say that behaviour is an issue, but we need to remember that behaviour occurs in a context, in the context of an organisation, and that's really the flavour that we'll put forth today, is taking that step back and looking more broadly about how the team and how the organisation, and of course even the industry itself, can start to contribute different cultural attitudes or beliefs that promote certain types of maybe at-risk behaviour if they're not managed effectively. So you'll see some statistics pop up on the screen there, and I won't go into those too much because we've probably seen a lot of statistics from the industry, but just to highlight a couple that really resonated for me. So the one around 28 claims per day with 1 or more weeks off work, that's hits home fairly hard in terms of the impact of safety incidents in the transportation industry, as well as the upwards trend in the hospitalisation rates. So there has been some great work in transportation. If you look at the Safe Work Australia website, those figures have been trending downwards. But we are starting to see a plateau, and in some cases, with these hospitalisations specifically, an upwards trend in terms of that figure. So there's something clearly going on there that we need to start digging down to and having a look at. So as I mentioned before, behaviour is typically one of the things that investigations highlight or focus on as being the core issue, and then we need to recognise that worker behaviour is really just I guess the end of a really long pointy stick. There's a lot of different branches that come off that twig, a lot of things that sort of fan out into the organisation and the different things that they're doing to manage safety. So what we need to do, and one of the objectives of today, is to start to unpack and understand safety culture and climate. What do they look like when they're applied to the transportation context? How do they actually drive driver behaviour? How do they affect the way that people go about their jobs? Importantly, how do we measure them? And also, how do we improve that safety culture? So these are some of the things we'll start to introduce today. So thinking about those statistics, you might sort of think, well, what sort of action's been taking place? What have government bodies been doing already in this space? And there has been some stuff. So over in the US, they're probably one of the first, I guess, developed nations to really tackle this culture issue in transportation. If anyone's familiar with the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Bureau, they're an independent investigator that's set up to look into transportation incidents and start to uncover what actually went wrong in that situation. So they held an important forum, sort of a landmark event that's focused specifically on safety culture and transportation. They really set the scene and the momentum moving forward for other countries, other regulators to start taking notice of this. Now, a bit closer to home, if you go to the Department of Transport and Main Roads website and look up their strategy area, you'll see that they've recently finalised their 2016-18 plan there, and they really take a cultural focus. So there's wording in there like making changes to the values and beliefs about safety, tackling different sort of behaviours that have cultural underpinnings like fatigue and vehicle roadworthiness. So there's definitely some initiative and action happening within Queensland itself. So for the fatigue specifically, that's one of the major ones that does come up with transportation a lot. We know that from research, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that external factors like culture do impact on things like how drivers, what they pay attention to. Fatigue can be something that really impacts their driving behaviour. Relatedly, in the industry itself, so there's a lot of cultural values around doing the job well, delivering on time and making sure that the customer gets their goods, really admirable ways of going about work, but in some situations that can actually start to create some safety risks as well. Now, the resounding, I guess, conclusion from all this work is that with safety culture particularly, we need to learn a bit more about how it applies to transportation to start making a more concerted difference and pushing those incident rates further down. There are some unique challenges with transportation specifically. So the context of that industry, there's very specific things that go on which do play out in the form of culture. One of the main themes would be around this idea of the lone worker or the very solitary driver, maybe disconnected from his organisation and sort of working long hours on his own or her own. This obviously has some implications for safety culture because with the I guess difficulties of maintaining that communication and having supervision over that individual, that can start to lead to cultures that may be a little bit weaker or different attitudes that are more driven by maybe the employees rather than the organisation. There's also less chances for people to share and talk about safety, hence that safety culture could be weaker over time. There's also a number of, I guess, job-specific factors that could play out in terms of making a safety culture even more important in transportation. So we know things like the dynamic nature of the work, things changing at very unexpected times or with short notice. Things like scheduling. So when the jobs don't quite go to plan, we have to readjust and sort of do things in a different way, which could be more or less safe. Things like leadership as well. So the different styles, whether the supervisor is perhaps more interested in the production targets or balances that with the concern for safety. Things that are to do with the system that the driver operates within as well. Remuneration schemes and ways of compensating drivers can lead to some at-risk behaviours at times if they're not managed well, as well as this complex supply chain relationship. What you might have is many different organisations, different safety climates, different safety cultures, different leaders with those underpinning values for safety that may differ. So this idea of a very complicated yet related environment that drivers work within. Now, despite all this uncertainty, the research to date has been productive, and there's a few things that we're confident about, things that we can sort of say, yes, these things are relevant for transportation, and this is what we'll build on with Sharon's presentation momentarily. So some of the things that we do know from the research done to date is that safety, climate, and culture, they are relevant. They do exist in the transportation industry. They might look a bit different to other industries, but they're certainly there and do have an impact on behaviour. The second thing is that within transportation specifically, having a positive safety climate is going to encourage safer driving behaviours and better safety outcomes. So we've seen some really great stuff being done to date that looks at the impact of safety climate on those antecedent events like hard braking, erratic driving and violations. So continuing this line of work will be very helpful. The third thing is that, and I've mentioned this before, is that it can be difficult to maintain that strong and positive safety climate and culture. You have lots of those different, I guess, work characteristics, people being away from the headquarters, limited opportunities to talk to each other about safety, which creates opportunities for different perceptions to form, and different values and different attitudes about safety. The last thing is the importance of leadership, and that's a critical underpinning of our Safety Leadership at Work program, is acknowledging the fact that leaders, whether they be informal or formal, actually have an impact on the culture and hence the safety performance. Okay, so before we move to Sharon, just to remind you what we're achieving today, it's important for transportation to take notice of that safety, climate and culture research that's coming out and figure out how to apply that to their industry to help achieve their safety goals. What we're aiming to do with this webinar series is it's more about the knowledge component and the awareness component. So helping you to feel more confident knowing what safety, culture and climate are, and then having the confidence to maybe take some action about that in the future. So as I mentioned, we'll be giving you some tools and resources, some different products that you can use straight away, and they'll be up on the website in the immediate term. Okay, so let's turn now to our first speaker, Dr. Sharon Newman from Monash University. Sharon, before we get started on the presentation, I'm sure people are probably a bit curious about you as a researcher, and I'm just wondering if you could answer the question. So how did you find yourself working as a transportation-specific safety researcher?
Hi, Tristan. Thanks for having me along here today. I came into the field, I suppose, very early in my research career. Actually, it's a really hard question to answer because I just kind of fell into the field. I was very interested in organisational psychology, and there was work around this workplace road safety, yet I think workplace road safety seemed to be dealt with from more of a road safety perspective, so that more of that safe systems approach. And I thought, well, there's people that are actually driving in an organisation, so aren't there organisational factors there that we should be considering outside of that, outside of that safe systems approach? So what safe systems doesn't actually consider the organisation. So that's how I became interested in it. So I thought we need to be able to build on the existing research in this field to look at workplace road safety as a separate entity to road safety and look at driving behaviour. Of course, it's going to be similar across the both settings, but there are unique factors that are actually influencing workplace road safety or driving behaviour. And the behaviours themselves, there's more relevant behaviours within this setting than others. So I suppose that's what brought me into the field.
Great, thanks for sharing, Sharon. I think this idea or theme of integrating lots of separate, streams of safety management research is a good one, and your work there is going to really help move things forward. Okay, so I might just turn it over to you then, Sharon. You can take us through your research, and yeah, we'll have time at the end for some Q&A and some commentary. So yeah, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, I'll continue with the presentation if I can. Oh, here we are. Sorry, we'll go to the next slide. Just a bit of a comical slide to start off with. I think it's generally underestimated the complexity of driving for work purposes. Not only are you thinking about your work-related tasks, but you're also thinking about things that are happening in your personal life, the pressures that you're under at that particular time, scheduling in eating times, for example. So as much as this is comical, it does represent the true extent of the situation and the different hazards that are identified within this field. I won't go through the extent of the problem. I'm just presenting a few statistics there, and Tristan presented a slide at the start as well. And it's not only heavy vehicles that need to be taken into account here, but it's the light vehicle fleets. So we're talking about people where driving is considered secondary to their primary job task, and I think the community nursing is a fantastic example of that. So these people, they consider their primary job task to go out to care for people in the community, and to get to that client, they have to drive. So but the driving is often not considered to be a part of their work role tasks. And I think in that there's a lot of problems because there's so much risk involved in the actual driving task, and that needs to be prioritised within the working schedule of those individuals. So I think it needs to be taken into account that light vehicle drivers represent a big problem in terms of workplace safety, and they need to be considered important within both data collection exercises and safety generally on the road from a broader road safety perspective. Tristan actually mentioned a couple of challenges, and I think that's really great that they are being recognised from a regulator's perspective, because I think this is one of the challenges that we face in this field, that this whole concept of the remote worker, so that person that works outside the physical boundaries of the organisation. So my past research has established that a culture actually exists within this setting, but the question is, how is it actually created? Because a lot of the research typically says the culture is created by the safety practices and the beliefs of the supervisors and senior management within an organisation. So when a person works outside the physical boundaries of the organisation, how does this actually, the concept of culture created? So I think that needs to be acknowledged to start off with, so you can actually identify relevant and targeted interventions. So some of those managerial challenges, that visibility. So how can you monitor the behaviour in the absence of in-vehicle telemetry, of course? The collection of objective information, why that's so important. Feedback and goal setting are two of the most powerful incentives in the workplace. So you take the ability to be able to objectively monitor behaviour, give timely feedback, then you actually eliminate the end result of that being that the individual is unable to actually modify their behaviour in the future to align with the feedback that they received. So there is challenges in terms of creating that culture, changing behaviour in this setting. Although it's a challenge, it definitely is, we're able to do it, and I'll show you a couple of interventions later in this slide. So, and just the first point I put up there too, in this area, the current interventions are typically focused at the individual level. So the approach in organisations is to think, okay, when a crash happens, let's just blame the driver for that crash. Let's not think beyond the driver. Think of all the managerial practices, such as scheduling practices, or the policies and procedures that are set by senior level management. I think safety in this setting needs to be conceptualised using a systems approach. So it's not only the individual driver, it's the road environment, the weather, it's the organisation, it's management, it's regulators and it's government. All of these factors need to be identified when actually investigating a crash to be able to move forward in terms of identifying relevant and targeted interventions. And I did a nice study a couple of years ago now looking at identifying factors contributing to crashes in 27 NTSB crash reports in the US. And again, it identified the whole concept of this is a systems issue. So there's factors that contributed to the crash that go beyond the driver, that they go to all different levels within the system, including, as I was saying before, the government, regulators, company, management, and even environment and road conditions. So all of these factors need to be considered. So what actually is organisational safety culture within this concept, within this workplace setting? And it's a very different concept, because if you look at the traditional measures of safety culture, it's all about the things, the tangible things that you can see, such as the workers' perceptions of the practices of the supervisor, more of those tangible things. So when you're talking about a person that works remotely, how does this whole concept of culture get created? And I think some of the multiple definitions that you have in terms of safety culture, they're all related to this perceptions of the value and priority given to safety. And in recent research, it's been established that this perception actually exists at a group and an organisational level. What that actually means is that there's practices that are happening in terms of the practices of supervisors and senior level management, which are actually creating that culture. So what that actually means in practice is that we can actually, if we modify the behaviour of the safety management skills of supervisors, for example, we can actually change that cultural perception at the driver level. So I think this whole concept of multi-level concept of culture is really important to be able to understand, because it has such a big impact on the types of interventions that are going to be relevant within this setting. So from this perspective, we can just look at it as being a psychological construct to start off with, and then look at all the different sub-dimensions, what this means. So people actually, in the past literature, has looked at things like management values, work pressure, commitment, safety policies and practices. I think basically the essence of all of this is that it's people's perceptions of the value for concern or the priority given to concern for health and wellbeing of the organisation. So if senior level management actually are committed to safety, if they have policies and procedures in place, it's perceived at the driver level as the organisation cares for a person's health and wellbeing. And I think this is a relatively easy construct to understand. Rather than trying to understand all these different sub-dimensions of what a safety culture is, let's just look at the essence of what we're actually trying to get at. And to me, that really is concern for worker health and wellbeing, and that's what I've based a lot of my research on, is trying to improve that perception of concern for worker health and wellbeing across an organisation in an effort to improve those climate perceptions. And much of that is through the process of communication itself. So regardless if a person works within the physical boundaries of the organisation or outside, communication still exists. So this is a common element, a denominator across all of different organisational concepts. So communication plays a really strong role in organisations. It's a relatively easy concept. The whole concept of safety culture has been bandied around for the last 40 years now. So I think it's really interesting when you actually think about how many papers have been written in this area. And what I'm trying to say now is it just comes down to one simple concept, and that's communicating well and communicating a concern for worker health and wellbeing. So I hope I'm not upsetting the academic community by trying to advocate such a simple approach to what has become such a complex problem, or not a problem, but a concept. So my approach to safety culture within the transportation industry, I take very much that systems approach. Now this systems approach, as this model indicates here, is very much as focused within the organisation itself, but it's really looking at the role of not only the workers, but line management and senior level management. In particular, looking at the worker level, you've got the safety capabilities of drivers, you've got their perceptions of safety, their attitudes, all the individual dispositions, you've got their driving behaviour as well. All of these things are actually influenced by the safety management skills of line management. And this is an area, that safety management skills, line management, that has been really overlooked. And I think that's because there's this perception of if a crash happens, let's blame the driver, where there's very little recognition given to the role that supervisors play in the safety management of drivers. So that's where a lot of my research is focused on recent years, is really trying to develop the skills of supervisors, identify what those skills are, develop them, and then being able to help them to manage the risks within an organisational context. So at the senior management level, I think this is a really interesting area because many senior managers, they go into the exercise of developing these policies and procedural documents. And oftentimes when I talk to organisations about these documents, it's something that sits on a shelf and generally gathers dust. And it's not something that's been developed in consultation with employees, which means that there's very little translation of what the safety capabilities are and the role of supervisors in the safety management of those drivers within these policies and procedural documents. So this knowledge translation is so important in being able to develop relevant and context-specific policies and procedures. So all of these systems, I think, play a really strong role in developing a program, a safety program within an organisation that is actually going to be relevant and effective. So I'm going to start from at the driver level. I've developed two programs in particular, and these programs, one of them being challenging drivers, key salient beliefs associated with unsafe driving behaviour. So I'll go through some of the results that I found from this program, again based on the concept of promoting concern for health and wellbeing, empowering drivers, and giving them feedback on driving behaviour so they're able to set goals to improve their future driving behaviour. So my driver development program, it's a two-stage approach. First of all, there's a research approach. Being actually to understand the context of your organisation is so critically important. So, and this is something that organisations can do on their own. You don't need a program to be able to do this, but to understand the safety capabilities of drivers and the perceptions of supervisors in the safety, or their roles in the safety management of drivers, is so critically important. And these can be done by surveys, through interviews and focus groups. And the kind of questions can be very simple too, but it really is getting down to understanding your employees within the organisation. So this organisational climate survey goes through a number of issues, factors such as looking at individual dispositions, perceptions of safety, and different types of driving behaviours. The behaviour modification part of this program, I use group-based discussions, so getting drivers in a group to be able to discuss the issues relevant to safety, I think is so important. Being able to create that whole communities of practice approach to actually hear about the experiences of other people, learn from those experiences, is so important, being able to modify future behaviour. And how you can actually do that is through, again, this magical concept of feedback. So feedback is just so critically important, and it's really quite a positive reinforcement as well. So the information that I get from the organisational climate survey, I present that information in the first half of the session of this group-based session to drivers. So basically giving them the information of what they told me in the survey, and not identifying any particular individual, but just aggregating the results to show these are the issues that are most problematic in your organisation. And usually in the organisations, you've got the different behaviours, for example, such as driving behaviours, speeding, inattention, tiredness while driving, and using a mobile phone, typically come up in the survey as the most problematic. What we don't understand from that point about giving the feedback is why people actually do that. So understanding the reasons for why they have to speed, why they're driving while inattention while driving, and using a mobile phone, for example, that needs to be understood and being able to move forward. So that group discussion is such a critical component of this driver development program. And that's first of all getting the drivers to reflect on reasons for why they drive unsafely. So in groups actually discussing the typical driving day and why they actually engage in these behaviours. The second part of this group-based discussion is about to get them to actually reflect on those reasons why they drive unsafely, and then to identify strategies to avoid those situations in future driving. And I think this is quite a powerful approach because it allows drivers to actually learn from other people's experiences. And a great example of this is mobile phone use. So if there's reasons for why people use their mobile phones, such as the supervisor calls them, which is really an unfortunate reason to hear, that their supervisor calls them to ask them about work tasks. And one of the strategies could be to actually turn their phone off and to notify the supervisor that they're going to be turning their phone off while they're in transit. So actually setting a plan for their journey is something that has often come up in the group-based discussions as an effective strategy to employ to avoid situations in which they're going to be using their mobile phone in the car. So through that process, three-stage process of feedback, group discussion, goal setting, that is basically the foundation of this behaviour modification program. So just a couple of results. So I've evaluated this in two contexts, one of them being in looking at self-reported speeding behaviour, and found that those individuals that actually engaged in the program significantly reduced their speeding behaviour, self-reported speeding over a 3-month period, which was really promising. The problem with that result, again, was the self-reported speeding. So the slide I have presented here is some objective data that I was able to collect through using onboard diagnostic tools, which is little devices actually embedded or fit in, underneath the dashboard of the vehicle, where we could actually monitor the overspeed violations in the day on a daily basis. And what we found in this study is that the average number of overspeed violations reduced from pre to post intervention. So taking drivers through the process of finding out the existing climate within their organisation, giving them feedback, talking about their experiences of why they're needing to exceed the speed limit, and setting goals to improve future driving behaviour was effective in reducing overspeed violations. As you notice from this graph, there's 4 drivers that actually reported increase in driver behaviour. There's this very small number, which is an obvious limitation of this study, but I looked at crashes in this sample 6 months prior to the intervention and found that 3 of the 4 drivers from this study actually reported having a crash in that 6 months prior to the setting. So I really can't say much about it given the small sample size, but it could be indicative of individuals that are very resistant to change. So, of course, this type of behaviour modification approach and the role of positive reinforcement and feedback goal setting is not going to be effective for every individual, and that's quite well known. But I think it showed that for the majority, it did actually improve safe overspeed or safe driving behaviour. The second program I'll talk about briefly is a program in safety management for the occupational driver. And I just flagged earlier in this conversation that this area has been really untapped, and I found in my past research that supervisors play a critical role in creating a climate in which safety is valued and prioritised within the organisation. So if they are actually playing a role in creating this culture, what can we actually do for supervisors to help them create that culture? And this is something where it's generally, in practice, it seems to be there are leadership programs out there that they're not actually focused on being able to develop those skills of supervisors to manage the safety of those workers that work outside the physical boundaries of the organisation. And as I mentioned previously, communication plays such a key role in being able to create this culture. So I think what we come down to when you're talking about safety management skills is interpersonal development skills. So how you're actually creating or understanding the safety capabilities of drivers is really important. So, and I think being able to do that requires a decent level of interpersonal skills. So what this program aims to do is to identify, help develop the skills of supervisors in identifying situations in which drivers are at risk on the road and manage those situations effectively. So we've been able to evaluate this program through just a case study implementation so far. So we haven't been able to collect any data, objective data from it. So I'm just going to present you with the conceptual framework, and if anyone would like to actually look at that case study implementation where we got feedback from drivers, the paper has recently been published, so I'm happy to send that through to anyone that may be interested. But what this program actually aims to do, it runs over a 3-month period, and these are the constructs that I really aim to focus on within the program, and that's clarifying the roles and responsibilities of supervisors in the safety management of drivers. It's because it's still not well acknowledged the role that supervisors play in managing the safety of an individual who works outside the physical boundaries of the organisation. So to actually clarify what those roles and responsibilities are is a really important step in being able to effectively integrate safety management skills within the daily working tasks of supervisors. And this is where this efficacy comes into it. So if supervisors have clarity in what their role is, it brings them to a stage of being able to more effectively integrate safety management within daily work responsibilities. And so we do this through being able to provide some self-assessments on their existing safety management styles. For example, looking at the style of leadership or safety leadership that you currently have, advocating for a balanced approach, not saying that any particular style of leadership is better, but being able to adjust and modify your leadership styles to deal with particular situations. So I think that's important, being able to reflect on own behaviour, again, providing feedback being such an important component within this program as well, and to be able to lead supervisors in a journey, to be able to look at ways in which they can modify their safety leadership skills to manage different situations where drivers are at risk. This whole concept of mindfulness is so important, so being attentive to and aware of a culture in which drivers are at risk on the road. And an element that comes up in the discussions in this program is the fatigue management. So when a person is working remotely, how do you actually identify that person as showing signs of fatigue? So again, really understanding your drivers, being able to identify situations in which they may be at risk, and that's even getting down to the level of being understanding what's happening in their personal lives and the impact that the things that are happening in their lives can have on the risks things that put them at risk in the workplace, and that driving being a big one too. So going through a couple of scenarios, so we do some role playing, not the embarrassing role playing where people are scared to get up in front of other people. But some situations where, yeah, typical driving scenarios, and what does the supervisor do in those scenarios? What's your response to those situations, and how can you modify your different style based on other people's feedback? This whole concept of pro-social motivation just really is what ties this whole program together, is promoting concern for health and well-being, and that's really what the essence of this program is about. I ran this program in one organisation, and I asked the participants to give me some feedback, and both positive and negative. And one of the comments that I received under the negative section was that you're trying to create mini psychologists. And I actually thought, wow, that's not a negative. I thought that was actually really quite a positive, because yes, that's pretty much exactly what I want to do. And by that, I mean that I don't want to trivialise, and I don't think the role of a safety manager should ever be trivialised, because it not only requires a person to be able to comply with OHS practice, but it also requires a high level of interpersonal development. To be able to understand the interpersonal or safety capabilities of your workers is such a tricky task, and it does require a high level of interpersonal skill. So I think that it's really important to be able to do that, and for organisations to acknowledge the complexity in the role of safety managers, the role of communication, the role of interpersonal skills, to be able to reduce risk in an organisation. So this is just a quote, and I think this is basically what I would like to get across in my research, and particularly the program, is that when you're working remotely, a leader needs to be able to convey that concern for health and well-being. And I think if that's conveyed effectively, that you're going to get workers that actually align their own safety beliefs with that of the supervisor. And I think that's an incredibly difficult challenge, but I think it's achievable, and it has been established that this safety culture exists within the transportation industry. How we do that, I think, is through this whole concept of communication and interpersonal skill development. At the organisational level, I'm just going to go through this super quick, and I think many people are very familiar with this sort of approaches to safety management within the transportation industry. But again, defining the policies and procedures, the role expectations and the behaviours of supervisors and drivers, ensuring there's adequate risk management strategies, crash database selection recruitment programs, looking into reporting and investigation processes. I think you learn a lot if you have reporting and investigation processes within organisations, and many don't. I'd love to hear from anyone that actually does have a reporting and investigation system. And in particular, one that actually identifies the systems approach. So looking at the factors, not only at what the impact, the factors contributing to the crash at the driver level, but what actually happens within the organisation at particular times of crashes. So I think that's something that's really missing in this industry. And I've talked about management commitment throughout this presentation. So I'm just going to give you a couple of slides before I end. I've worked with one organisation in Queensland quite a few years ago now, over a 3-year period, to improve their safety program. And what we found from running out the 2 programs that I presented today was there was a significant improvement in safe driving behaviour for the supervisors and the drivers that participated in the interventions. Over that 3-year period, the organisation also saw an insurance premium reduction of $29,000. Driver at-fault crashes reduced from a high of 42% in 2008 to a low of 36% in 2011. And the speeding infringements also reduced over that time. There was a high of 14 per month in 2009, and they reduced to a high of 6 per month in 2011. So I think it really shows this whole approach of safety culture and climate is very powerful. And there's many organisations out there that look to driver training alone. This whole skill development, improvement in driver skill is going to solve the problem. But I think culture is so much more complex than that. And it actually, you need to be able to understand the safety capabilities of your drivers, and you need to develop those skills as supervisors and being able to identify situations in which drivers are at risk on the road and to manage those situations effectively. And those kind of investments, I think, can have such long-term favourable outcomes as shown in this example. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sharon. One of the things that really hit home for me was just your passion there and your depth of expertise in transportation. So thanks for sharing it with us. People that are in the audience, we'll ask for questions shortly, but if you had anything immediate, I'd recommend you just start putting those into the Q&A box now, and we'll try and take a couple of those before we finish. Sharon, also just that idea of, really distilling all that massive bulk of safety culture literature into a key idea, that idea of the culture of care, or, supervisors just taking an interest in their workers is a powerful one. And, I really see that as one of our roles as a regulator in our engagement capabilities is working with people like you, identifying those little nuggets and making sure they get out to industry. So, yeah, we'll keep working on that one, I think. Okay, well, we'll take a little different turn now and start to hear from someone in industry that's living and breathing this stuff in a day-to-day role. So Anastasia's, we're lucky to have her along today, who's going to take care of that part. Anastasia, I guess one of the first things is just maybe just comment on what DGL's doing in this safety culture and climate space. Are you guys working on anything here that maybe resonates with what Sharon was saying, or some sort of strategy there to improve your safety culture?
Hi Tristan, thank you, and I'd just like to thank Sharon as well. Her presentation was definitely thought-provoking. Based on Sharon's research and her presentation there, I could definitely see some of her findings aligned with what DGL has identified recently with their safety culture. We had an incident, I think, earlier this year, which indicated to us that whilst our senior management team leads safety and drives it, probably not, I guess, resonating at a lower level within our management team. So we actually took a good reflection upon the business to see what we could do to improve. We were lucky enough to partake in a cultural survey. It was through Safe Work Australia, and definitely the results of that gave us some evidence where we need to look for improvement. I would definitely have to agree that we're looking at our line managers now and ensuring that they actually have the safety capabilities and training. So that definitely aligns with what Sharon's been talking about today.
Thanks, Anastasia. Is there any sort of particular examples of what Sharon was talking about? Maybe those group discussions with the workers or with the supervisors. Are you guys doing anything like that, or have you heard of anything happening in industry like that?
Sure, we've got quite a few safety matrix that we work off, and one of those is a requirement for each of our sites, and we have, I believe, over 30 nationally, and a lot of those would be deemed remote sites. All of our sites are required to have a toolbox at least once a month where safety is the key focus of that meeting. I think the managers are lovely and cook up a barbecue and all of the staff attend that. One of the things that we have identified was there was a disconnect between, I guess, what feedback was coming through the drivers and our supervisors at those meetings as to then what was making it into feedback to the senior management team. We've put a focus in our health safety unit lately of ensuring that we have a positive safety leadership. So rather than a lot of our supervisors and workers hearing from the health and safety team when there's been an incident or accident, we're really focusing on having a positive and proactive safety communication.
Yeah, great. So the toolbox, of course, is something that many industries use, and it's great that transportation's picking that up and using it as well. I'm sure there's things that will come out from Sharon's research and other researchers that will help you, further unlock the power of that toolbox, how to make that discussion really lively and relevant for workers and promoting action. All right. Well, we're kind of coming towards the end of the webinar, so we might just cross now into the questions, and if anyone has any questions, you can tap them into the Q&A box on the side. I did have one for Sharon, and Sharon, I hope this isn't a bit of a curly one, but I was looking at your graph there, and maybe some other people were noticing that a few individuals might have increased in terms of their safety performance, like in terms of less effective safety performance pre and post. Now, to me, that really suggests moderators or some other maybe contextual factor that might be explaining that why the intervention might not have worked or might not have been so effective for certain people. Do you have any gut feelings or intuitions about what might make that intervention more or less effective in an organisation?
Yeah, that's it's a really good question, Tristan. And I mentioned briefly through in the presentation that I looked at the crash history of those individuals, the 16 individuals, 6 months prior to the intervention. And for the 3 of the 4 people that actually reported an increase in overspeed violations across that time, they actually had a crash in that 6 months, which very anecdotally, you could actually say that these people are actually resistant to modifying their driving behaviour. And for a great example of this type of person, when I was living in Queensland, my neighbour had lost his driver's licence 7 times, and he still believed that he was a very good driver and a safe driver. And his whole reason for losing his licence 7 times was because that he had to drive unsafely on the road, i.e. speeding is one of the big ones, for him to overcome the limitations of those poor drivers on the road. So I used to take these different programs that I had and the concepts and run them by him, and there was continuous resistance towards anything that was going to challenge or modify his behaviour. But it gave me really good insight in what to expect and how to actually change things to look at different ways in which we can actually address this issue. So I'm putting it down to resistant drivers, but yeah, there could be a whole range of other reasons, which I'm always keen to hear about other people's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I suppose you're maybe talking about individual, maybe personality factors or things like, beliefs like locus of control. A lot of work there to sort of untangle those things, and maybe even contextual factors like, the supervisor's style of leadership could impact the effectiveness of that intervention. Thanks, Sharon. So Anastasia, I had a little question for you too. In your experience, do you think there's any, industry challenges or barriers to starting that safety culture journey? Maybe you've had some experiences yourself, or with DGL. Anything that people just starting out on that journey? Any wisdom for them?
Very good question. I think I took the positives from Sharon's presentation just then, was ensuring open communication. We talked about ensuring that supervisors have appropriate training. I do believe that there's been quite a change in the industry in the last 10 years, which used to relate back to the very old school kind of get the job done approach. I think there's been a fantastic shift within the industry, both on-road and for off-road practices. So I think that they've definitely got a lot more heading towards the right direction recently. DGL actively participates in the leadership group, and we also attend as many workplace health and safety and participate in the many initiatives that they offer. There's very good ones I talked to before about the safety culture evaluations, and there's also presentations and everything that they can go along to. So I encourage transport people to attend these kind of things.
Thanks, Anastasia. Well, we're coming to the end of our time now. We've had a couple of little questions through. So one of them was about access to resources, and yes, certainly in the next few weeks we'll have that recording posted up there. So if you want to fast forward to certain bits and watch it again, that's fine. Some summaries as well coming out as a resource you can download. There was one question about situational awareness testing. So I assume that's a similar concept maybe to what was born out of aviation. I know that literature stream has been applied in different areas. We're not looking at it specifically at the regulator, but maybe that's one area that the transportation could benefit from. So some ideas potentially of future projects. All right. Well, we'll call it a day because we've gone through a lot of content, and we'll finish on time for you. So just to refer to those resources again. So again, there'll be a summary of what's been spoken about today. We've got all of Sharon's information in there, and some different publications and whatnot that she's published that you can download. A couple of articles just for that foundational piece. So one about clarifying safety culture, climate and leadership. That'll be up on our program webpage soon, as well as some practical tools. So This webinar is part of I guess, a broader strategy where we're really looking to increase safety culture capability in industry. And to do that, it's quite an exciting project. We're working on a toolkit which will enable businesses to measure their safety culture and climate and start to look at how to improve it. To support that's coming down the track, there's a couple of resources here. So choosing the right safety climate tool if you're currently looking for one, as well as how to administer one effectively, all the different processes you should follow to make sure that data, you have trust in it and you can use it effectively. Okay, so to close off today, just to mention again our Safety Leadership at Work program. So if you're not a member already, you can sign up for free. I really recommend it because you'll get advance notice of these type of events, as well as all those resources. You can go down and download those directly. The SLAW program, as I mentioned, is about capacity building, and that's really what we're focusing on for the rest of this year and next year is bringing that information to you, hopefully through these different events. Now, the next one that we have coming up is Health and Community Services, and that's going to be happening on the 12th of May. Professor Helen DeCherry, she did the introduction, and she's coming back to do her area of expertise, which is in that sector. She's going to be talking about leading indicators, how to measure them in that industry, and how to inform different improvement initiatives as a result. And the one after that, of course, is construction, finally, and then the following one will be the conclusion, bringing it all together. So after today, you'll be prompted to complete a very short feedback survey. We did look at the first session feedback, and we're very thankful for those that did that. We're trying to change it as a result, so please do share your experiences about today, and we'll make sure we incorporate what changes we can for the future events. So thanks again, and yeah, stay tuned for the recordings and the resources, and hopefully we'll see you again for the next webinar. Have a good day.